Well, another day, another lawsuit, and welcome back to Tailosive Tech live on YouTube, everybody. Hope you're doing well out there, because Apple ain't. They're trying to have a good day, but they just can't catch a break. It seems like every government is cracking down on them. Who's next? We've had European Union threaten to break them up, force them to allow alt stores and sideloading. Now we've got Apple being sued by the Department of Justice. Their home turf, the United States government, now is going after Apple, in my opinion, in traditional classic United States government form, for the dumbest reasons out there. I mean, does Apple use monopolistic practices in some way, shape, or form? I mean, there might be some arguments to be made, particularly when it comes to preventing third parties from advertising certain things that compete with their own services. Yeah, a little bit here and there, but that's not what the Department of Justice is bringing up. No, their lawsuit is more about how the Apple Watch only works with iPhones and how it's hard to send text messages to Android users, even though Apple has already announced RCS support is coming later this year. I guess it wasn't soon enough, because the U.S. government is upset that you have to learn different user interfaces if you stop using an iPhone. So yeah, it's a pretty big joke. I don't understand how there isn't anything else better for the Department of Justice to work on. I didn't really want to do a video on this because it's so easy and cliche, I guess, and repetitive to complain about the government, just because, I don't know, there's so many issues with the government as is. But yeah, now Apple's got more Department of Justice jumping on their back, but I feel like the argument that they're using in the lawsuit is quite weak. Apple has actually had to publicly confirm that they did work on trying to make Apple Watch compatible with Android for about 3 years, and I guess they just couldn't get the system right. They probably realized they would have to bring so many Android apps. You got the Activity app, you've got the Apple Watch app. Is that it? Oh, well, would texting work with it? Because we have a Messages app on the Apple Watch. I guess you could try to sync the Messages app for watchOS with whatever the default messaging app is on Android. Nah, that probably wouldn't make sense. It'd be easier to just have an iMessage app. Ugh. J Money, thank you for 30 months of support. I might get a 14-inch M3 Pro MacBook Pro. Thoughts? Yep, Burkhart beat me to it. Feel like Drew's going to say you should have gotten an M1 Pro for cheap. He said I might get. He hasn't gotten it yet, Burkhart. I would look around I would shop around for some deals if you're worried that the M1 Pro is too old. M2 Pro is cheaper now as well. I guess it depends on I don't know. It depends on what you're looking for. I don't know how you're going to use it, but I might recommend, not everyone agree with me on this, but I might recommend the non-pro 14-inch MacBook Pro, which is very confusing. Thanks for all these names. Third-party digital wallets is a terrible, terrible idea. Yeah. I think the DMV refused to support the digital driver's license in the wallet app, but then they made their own DMV digital license app, which sucks and has a terrible user interface, and they support that. Oh my God, I hate the DMV. You're probably going to need Apple Health. Oh, true, for health tracking data. So they'd have to develop about 4 different Android apps, all of this for nothing. All of this so that they can lose more potential revenue. But yeah, I don't understand it personally. This whole argument of Apple having a monopoly on iOS is, I think, so. Who said it yesterday? Someone explained it pretty well. It's like saying Coca-Cola has a monopoly on Sprite. You know, Sprite is owned by the Coca-Cola company, but I think it's this fundamental disagreement that governments seem to have that the general public may or may not agree with. I don't agree with, but the federal government seems to have this mindset that a tech product, if it becomes successful enough, like the iPhone or, the iOS App Store, if it's popular enough, then it is now just a public inherent good. Like, it's our right to have access to the iOS App Store, and Apple has too much control over this, like, public. They treat it more like a utility. They treat it like the iPhone is now electricity. Like we can't have one company in control of all of the electricity, right? Well, no, that's actually what we have here with PG&E. That sucks. No, the Department of Justice isn't going to do anything about real monopolies, but real monopolies that are jacking up the electricity prices, and there's nothing we can do about it because there's no other utilities to change to. Let's not worry about that. Let's focus on Apple. If anything, it's kind of an indirect compliment, the fact that so much of the Department of Justice is convinced that buying something other than an iPhone is just not an option. There's a bunch of bunch of arguments being made both from the European Union and now in the US that are just about, well, you have complete control over whatever's on my phone. Well, it's just when it's an iPhone we have control over iPhones. But well, what if I want to download something that's not approved from the iOS App Store? Okay, then I guess buy an Android phone. I can't buy an Android phone. Then I'd have to relearn how the user interface works. That's far too much work. It's like everyone just acknowledging how bad Android is. Yeah, we're not worried about the Google monopolies. They saw your video about Android falling, Drew. This is your fault. Oh, dang it. Now you're pushing it back on me. Simply Source says, thank God the government is stepping in so my iPhone doesn't run as seamlessly as it does right now. Thank you, government. God, I love a big government. They're so smart. J Money says, I was looking at getting the normal M3 MacBook Pro, but I want the USB-C port on the right. Okay, then yeah, I'm still going to fall back on either M2 Pro or M1 Pro. The M3 Pro doesn't have that many advantages. Will I ever bring Tailosive Tech Ultra? I did for a while, but I felt bad about it because I offered it as a perk for people who wanted to collab, but I think people were expecting their channels to take off if I came on them, and I don't think they did. So I felt awkward about it, so I decided that's just too much money to be routinely charging any fan. I appreciate any support you guys provide. You help me out just by watching, so Tailosive Tech Max is honestly quite outrageous as it is, but Apple should buy Aptera. I agree with you. Apple having a monopoly over secure messaging in the US is true, though. I don't think that's true. I mean, they have the most simple secure messaging, but you can use other messaging platforms. I would say Meta has a monopoly more so because the most popular messaging app in the US is not iMessage. So how could it be a monopoly? It's the only, you're convinced that there's no other texting service that is secure? Well, just because Meta owns WhatsApp, that means it's not secure. I thought it was end-to-end encrypted now on WhatsApp, whereas I'm not sure if it's that way with iMessage because it's only secure if you're texting other iPhones. So if you're using the Messages app to text other Androids, it's not. Yeah. So you're saying Apple is the only company who has figured out a way to send messages securely, and therefore, because they're the only company that have figured that out, they should be forced to offer all of those texting services on Android for free. Even though that brings them no revenue, it doesn't help them do anything. It's just, they should just give all that away. Who do you think is the most monopoly, Apple, Google, or Meta? I would say Google has practically a monopoly on the internet, the like search engines. I mean, you can use other search engines, but I guess no one else does. I mean, you have the option, so I don't even think it's really a great case to be made as a monopoly. I think the government spends far too much time on those tech companies and not on true monopolies. Like, utility companies are far more susceptible to being monopolies. Like where I live, for example, PG&E raised the prices of electricity by about 30% at the start of this year, which, when a lot of people drive electric cars, that can be a huge... Imagine if your gasoline just went up, your gas bill just went up 30% and you couldn't stop it. One day you're paying, $3 a gallon. Now you're paying $4 a gallon over the, just over a week. And there's no regulation on that, or the same thing with internet service providers. There's a bunch of places where Comcast is the only internet provider, and Comcast is, of course, evil and horrible, and they have terrible customer service, and they intentionally raise their prices and hope that you don't notice and you call and complain, and then they lower them back again. There's a bunch of monopolistic companies like that I could think of. But no, I don't even think. Maybe you could argue Google has a monopoly on video content online, just because if you want to post content and monetize it, YouTube is pretty much the only option, and they control a lot of what you can and can't post on YouTube. I'm grateful for that, but there's really no alternative for someone who wants to post video entertainment. Um, I would say iOS, I think in the US, is at about 60% market share. But if anything, to me, that's proof that it's not a monopoly, it's a duopoly between iOS and Android. Android still has a fairly large percentage of the market, and offers a lot of different things that iPhones don't offer. I know a lot of people that hate iPhones and don't want to use them. So imagine if gas went up 30% overnight and you couldn't do anything about it. That literally happened in 2022. Yeah, but at least you got multiple options to pull from. Again, I don't think that's right, but oil is already heavily subsidized as is. Um, I guess I had an EV then, so I don't remember it. PG&E is regulated by the Public Service Commission, correct? So more government. Well, not enough. They're not doing anything about it. They just woke up and said, "Yeah, let's raise all the prices like crazy." Why wouldn't you switch to a 13 mini? Lightning. That's the only reason. It's not about market share. Well, are you going to say any company with monopolistic practices is evil, even if they have less than 1% market share? Should the government get involved? I mean, how many Android smartwatches only work with Android? I'm pretty sure that's how the Pixel Watch works, but the Department of Justice isn't suing Google for making sure the Pixel Watch only works with. They're a victim of their own success. Department of Justice. Because you have encrypted messaging, you are legally required to help Meta and Android with their weaker security messaging services. See, that's the funny thing. I'm pretty sure Meta has end-to-end encryption on WhatsApp. WhatsApp is far closer to being a, market share one type thing. Google has a huge advantage over all the other search engines. It's kind of impossible to use anything else. I don't know, if you want to access a lot of smartphones, I guess you got to play by Apple's rules. But I think it's a difficult dichotomy. I mean, that's the funny thing, is that's not really what the Department of Justice is going after with the lawsuit. But if you're going to make the argument for monopoly, the App Store stuff is a much better argument to be made, because you're trying to argue that, like, smartphones have been so successful now, they're so popular now, that if you develop an app or a service or something and you want it to be accessible on smartphones, you have to play by Apple and Google's rules. But funny that Apple gets all of the criticism and Google's just like, eh. But I guess maybe it's because sideloading's easier on Android. The funny thing about DOJ wanting Apple Watch on Android is that it hurt Android Watch sales a lot and not make any iOS users switch. That's funny. You're right. It would probably result in Apple Watch sales doing better. And then Apple would be even more of a monopoly. What's the end result here? If this is all Apple News becomes over the next 10 years, is just more and more governments cracking down on Apple, are they going to get broken up? I'm kind of interested in that subject. How would we break apart Apple if we had to break them up? Would you turn AirPods into its own business, and then the iPhone into its own business? Would Vision Pro become its own separate company? I don't know. Google announces AI government lawsuit. Apple announces AI rumored collab with Google. I can't keep up with these messages. He thinks Android being a competitor means Apple is a monopoly, but making so many excuses to why Google and YouTube are a monopoly, even though there are 10 times more video site options to choose from. Well, there's probably 100 different versions, but none of them are going to have the CPMs you need to actually generate income, which is why I don't personally think, like I just said, I don't think Google should be broken apart as a monopoly. But I'm saying, if you were looking at a big tech company, the question earlier was asking specifically between Apple, Google, and Meta, who's the closer to monopoly. I would say you have a better argument to be made with Google because of their domination with search, and purely if we just look at market share. iOS versus Android is fairly split down the middle, but it's not like YouTube is 60% and Twitch is like 40%. No, YouTube is like 95% of, monetized online video content. Of all the revenue generated, YouTube is like not even no one comes close to YouTube in regards to where to find online. I guess it's TikTok now too. So you got to compete with that, but um it's a very very different, one's very short form focused, one's very long form focused. It's almost apples and oranges. They're trying to bleed more into each other. Again, what I acknowledge in the case of Google and YouTube, in the same way I acknowledge it with Apple in the App Store, is that it's not easy to run a site as large as YouTube. All of the servers to pay for, all of the advertiser revenue to take in and know how to distribute it among the videos. It's not easy to just get that up and running. In fact, we've seen with examples like Vimeo, they actually punish people when the video gets too big. They say you have to pay us or we're going to take this video down because it's causing us too much traffic and our servers can't handle it. So my point is, for a giant, worldwide site as successful and as big as YouTube to actually function, you kind of need a giant multi-billion-dollar, trillion-dollar company to be powering the whole thing. I know it's, on one hand, it's like, well, it's too big, let's break it up so we have like 15 different video sites to distribute the ad revenue from. But not one small company is actually capable of maintaining all of that server on the back end, maintaining all of the different monetization programs, and making sure that, you don't have creators that shouldn't be monetized getting monetized, because that ticks off the advertisers. They don't want their ads being shown on certain types of content. So there has to be some moderation involved. It's just a big mess. And in the same way, I know that too late. How do I feel about ad block? I did a video on ad blockers. I think they're not illegal, but they're morally wrong, and they don't result. If everyone used an ad blocker, there would be no YouTube. It would just shut down. There is a situation in which the world can work with a combination of ads and paying to get rid of ads, because the creators you watch need to get a cut. Otherwise, it's not worth their time to post stuff. The distributor needs to get a cut because it's not free to maintain this whole website, send out updates, and make sure that everybody on Earth can watch whatever video you want within a matter of minutes. That's not free to maintain. That's not free to ensure is always working. So the distributor needs a cut. The creator needs a cut. Ad blocker just involves no one getting a cut. So the more people that use ad blockers, the worse the ads get. The less people that use ad blockers, the more the creators get paid. So there's not really a sufficient end goal with ad blockers. It's the same, to me, ad blocking is kind of the same concept as pickpocketing or, shoplifting. It's like, will stealing a candy bar from 7-Eleven make the company go bankrupt? No, but that doesn't mean it's, okay. YouTube Premium is the best ad blocker. I agree. YouTube Premium supports the creators you want to watch. It gets rid of the ads, assuming the creator isn't too sponsor heavy, which I know is a different problem, but that's just why I don't watch a lot of creators that are too sponsor heavy. But I'm pretty sure the next version of Chrome is going to significantly limit ad blockers. Good. I'm in favor of it. I mean, I don't understand why people get upset by that. Like, no, why is Google cracking down on ad block? Why do you think? You think they're going to be okay with it? YouTube should come up with another idea. They should pull all of the money from the sky. What do you think about Netflix with ads? Yeah, it's a simple concept. If it's cheaper, it's free with ads that usually advertise. No one really likes ads. You just have ads as another form of payment. If you don't want to pay for this service, then you watch a commercial, and that's how you paid for it. I don't agree with ad blockers, but at the same time, I can see why people use them. YouTube has way too many ads, and YouTube Premium is way too expensive. I understand the desire in the same way I understand why someone might want to shoplift something. Okay, now you can get a candy bar for free. Does that make it right? No, not really. There's not a solution in which everybody just switches to ad blockers. That's how the whole site falls apart. We just answered the question in the video title with yes, so iOS and iPadOS get actively better. I don't think breaking up Apple would actually make it better, personally. I think the reason Apple's software and hardware is so good is because it's all so well integrated and you have cross collaboration between the teams. Not iPadOS. There's no iPadOS team. That doesn't exist. If you want YouTube to go broke, then don't use the service. Oh my god. No, I'm not. Sorry, I'm not putting up with that. I don't want to hear about that. It's like, okay, if you want to take down YouTube, stop using it because it's my livelihood. You wouldn't know who I was. You wouldn't know who I am if it weren't for YouTube. I wouldn't have a job if it weren't for them. I have a seething hatred for ads, but I want to support my favorite creators and services. I'm more than willing to pay and feel good about blocking ads. Well, the best way to do that is through YouTube Premium, that's for sure. Um, and by the way, the more people that use ad blockers, that's why the ads on YouTube get worse, is because there's more people using the site's services, but not paying for it through ads or through YouTube Premium. So you're just pushing the ads onto someone else. It's kind of rude in my opinion. They should lower YouTube Premium's price so they get more subscribers. I wish, but there's an equilibrium point where it's like this is how much it costs to support the creators. This is how much it costs to maintain the back end. So yeah, it would be nice if the iPhone was $1 instead of 1,000, but it's just not. It's not feasible. Um, I hate regulation, but I do want someone to force Apple to open up their products to make them better. I mean, I'm in favor of basically Apple doing what they want. Personally, I don't think they've reached this size where that's the whole concept with a monopoly is that people have lost the ability to choose. Like you cannot choose anything other than Apple. And I think that is the case with like utility companies or a lot of internet service providers where simply based on where you live, you cannot go with another company. This is the only brand you can use for internet access or electricity or gas or water. This is the only company you have. But treating the iPhone itself or the iOS App Store as the only way to use a phone or the only app store you can possibly use. I don't see that. I don't look at the iPhone as a utility. I still looked at it as a product. If you don't like it, you don't have to buy it. There are still plenty of people in my life that do not buy iPhones. I hate to break it to you, but they're still perfectly capable of texting. They can still text, they can still communicate, they can still get the job done, they can check emails, they can watch videos. This concept that the iPhone is like the only way to use a smartphone, I just don't buy it. Yeah, the best way to do it is YouTube Premium Family. That's what we do as well, and then we split it between the 6 people. So we end up paying about $4 a month for YouTube Premium. That's a lot cheaper. That's getting rid of YouTube Music wouldn't change anything because when you get rid of ads on YouTube, you could YouTube Music, the app is just a UI. It doesn't all it is pulling YouTube videos that are songs because people just upload music to YouTube as a video or as an album. So YouTube Music is not some like additional back end cost. All YouTube Music is just a app that makes it look like a Spotify or like an Apple Music app, but it's still just pulling from the same YouTube servers. That's why they let you switch between. So taking out the YouTube Music part of the subscription wouldn't really change anything. The point is there's a certain price you have to pay in order to cover people's lack of ad watching, whether it be listening to music or watching videos. So I don't see how removing the music app would change anything because you could just open the YouTube app and play the music videos. People upload them like that. So there's something more to this than claiming it's a monopoly. Google won't limit ad blockers because there's a clear sign to the DOJ that they're a monopoly. I don't think ad blockers are protected under. I mean, you don't have to use Google Chrome, right? You can use another browser if you want, but I'm guessing that browser is going to make substantially less money because the only people who are going to use the ad blocking supportive browser are the people who don't want to pay for things. Um, if Apple allowed third-party marketplace, they could have avoided the whole thing, but because they know they're a monopoly when it comes to iOS entry, they didn't. Well, here's my point. iOS market share is growing, and especially if we look at the difference between uh, consumer spending, people are way more comfortable spending money with the iOS App Store than they are on other app stores. So the revenue generated from the mobile app marketplace, Apple has a huge chunk of that market. So what it means is Apple has done something right with the iOS App Store to make it feel safe, to make it feel reliable, to make customers feel more willing to spend money on that app store. And when you have a more open, less regulated more side-loaded alt store or whatever, more third-party app marketplace, people are less likely to spend money on that app store because they don't feel as comfortable with it. They feel like there's more malware. They feel like there's more scams. So it's funny to me that the iOS app store is the most successful, and everyone's asking why can't Apple be more like the more unsuccessful platforms that resulted in people spending less money. In reality, sure, it's frustrating that you got to pay Apple the 15% fee or whatever. Again, all of this to say the Department of Justice isn't really going after the App Store. They're going after Apple Watch, iPhone compatibility, and texting, which has really already been solved with the RCS compatibility thing that Apple already agreed to. Um, but the App Store is a much more interesting argument, which is why I know people want to fall back to that because it's actually there's a better case to be made there. But I would make the case that if it was more open and it wasn't as well regulated and it was more like other platforms, it probably would have resulted in consumers spending less money on the app market, which means developers and the businesses that develop apps would have less revenue. So there is, I think, a case to be made that maybe having a more lockdown first party approach to the app market, because the iOS App Store has been far, 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 far more successful than uh, the Apple App Store on the Mac. It's like, well, they did it with the Mac, yeah, and it wasn't as good. Didn't take off as well. They're not asking you to allow every app on their store. They're asking you to allow the user to put any app store they see fit. Who's asking? It's not the Department of Justice. I don't know what. Who's asking? Um, you can argue in bad faith that Apple can't have monopoly on their own software, but once they ship out that phone, it's not theirs. It belongs to the user, and they get to decide what goes on their phone. I mean, I don't think that's exactly true. It's the same thing as like you can buy a song. That doesn't mean you own the distribution rights to that song. It means you can play that song on your headphones in your car, but that doesn't mean you own the royal. Apple still owns the royalty. They get to decide what software gets to be booted up on that phone. So while yes, you own the phone, Apple's not forced or required to make software changes based on your will. And if you don't like it, don't buy an iPhone. I keep falling back to this. If what makes you feel like you are forced to buy an iPhone? Like you cannot buy another phone that allows you to do side loading. Buy the Fairphone, people. If you really want a more repairability focused open platform that lets you install what you want to install, why aren't y'all buying Fairphones? Fairphones look great. Feels like they prioritize everything you want. I think you should support the company you want with with your money. People don't understand that Apple is selling a platform itself rather than individual products that work with any platform or service. I just think that it's the operating system and the platform that's part of the reason it's done so well. It's super successful, and then and then the Department of Justice is angry that it was successful. It should be more like the unsuccessful platforms. It's like, how dare you give consumers what they're asking for? Apple built the house and they're renting it to you. Yeah, that's pretty much a better way to look at it. According to Ferrari, if you buy their cars, you can't modify them in any way. Well, I mean, you can do what you want. The government's not going to come in your house and arrest you for, jailbreaking your iPhone or whatever. But Apple's not forced to make it easy for you. That's the difference. Um, uses the product that you could use it exactly how you want it. Apple's not going to break in. The point is, Apple's not being forced, at least in the US yet. Apple is not forced to make side loading and alt stores easy. That's my point. If they design the software, they're still in charge of that. If you want to, rip apart the phone and turn it into some Frankenstein thing, you can do whatever you want with it. They're not going to stop you, but they're not required to help you. Fairphone got rid of the headphone jack? Oh my God. Oh, that's hilarious. Remember, Google creates the engine that most browsers are based on, so ad blocking being limited would be more widespread. Well, why does everybody want to use the Google engine? It's a ridiculous ploy to sell Fairbuds. It was ridiculous. Oh, so even Fairphone is doing what Apple does. They're kind of forced in Europe to open it up, but that's as we're seeing malicious compliance. if this happened 10 years ago, would the EU have demanded to allow jailbreaking? That's kind of another way to look at it, I guess. But no, jailbreaking is not illegal, just to be clear. I mean, it's harder and harder to do, but again, if you don't like it, don't buy an iPhone. The idea that Apple should be forced to allow any software feature you want, um, I don't know. I think there's a certain level of entitlement people have with it of just like, I own it, it's mine, so let me do anything. Let me pirate all of the movies if I can do it. Why would you stop me from pirating all the content? Why would you stop me from scamming people? You know, it's like, if these are the terms and conditions you agree to when you have an Apple ID. This is what happens. um, if you don't agree to those terms, then okay. That's how the free market works. But my point is, this is what a lot of people are actively choosing. The companies that allowed the freedom of choice, that allowed the more open platform, they didn't perform as well. Uh, the general public didn't want that. They didn't choose that. They chose to go with the more locked down, closed off ecosystem because that one felt better. That felt safer, and they felt more comfortable spending their money there. So the government's basically forcing companies to make worse, inferior hardware and software, in my opinion. It's like, um, if this didn't work, then I don't think the companies would do it. But if it doesn't work and if it annoys the consumers enough, then they won't buy it. That's how free market works, right? The company that prioritizes the software and features that matter to them will either reap the benefits because lots of people want that, or they will suffer the consequences because people don't like that, so the sales will decline. This feels like an attempt to punish Apple for being successful. Apple is a private company and should uh, design products and services as it sees fit. No one is forced to buy from Apple. I agree. Subconsciously, you still think of these things as Android, and all things Android is bad. No, dude, I have an Android phone. I've never said I hate Android. I just said iOS. I think iOS is better. I love the Pixel 8. I almost switched to it because it was so good. But um, there are so many great, cheaper alternatives with great hardware on the Android side. I really don't see Android as bad. I just see it as different. And I see iOS as prioritizing more of what I care about. And I acknowledge the same thing with Google managing YouTube. I acknowledge that building a reliable and big platform with your own hardware and your own software running on it, it's not easy. It's not easy. It's not, it's very complicated to build out the whole ecosystem and the whole market and everything. Which is why I think it's fair for Apple to take a cut. It's the same way grocery stores take a cut of third-party products that they sell. Walmart takes a cut of all the items in there, and then they have in-house brand stuff that's cheaper. This happens with lots of businesses, and it just extended on into the App Store market as well. I love this phone, by the way. It's a giant brick. I wish more companies would make crazy brick phones like this. It's like a month-long battery life. I love this thing. But for my day-to-day life and for continuity camera like I'm doing right now, because Apple had great collaboration between the teams we had the same company in control of Mac OS and the same company in control of iOS, they were able to make this simple system where I can just select my iPhone as an option, put it up here, and boom, and now I have a external camera for my Mac. It's from being all that native built-in integrated software and hardware that made this work so seamlessly and so smoothly, instead of relying through some cheap, crappy third-party app, which I've tried to do on this, and then they have watermarks everywhere. They want you to pay to get rid of it. No, instead, Apple, through their ecosystem, was able to make this simple, intuitive feature work naturally without the need of downloading a third-party app or whatever. Options are good. I don't think all companies should be forced to run the exact same way. Apple's dominance in the U.S. market is solely due to their success in the smartphone space, and now they're being punished for being so good at it. Yeah, pretty much. Easier for surveillance. Oh, yeah, well, if you don't want government surveillance, I hate to break it to you, but you got to live in a cabin in the woods without electricity. Whether it legally qualifies as a monopoly, I don't know, but obviously Apple's dominance in the U.S. market warrants some scrutiny from regulators. USA has been woefully behind on consumer rights. I think maybe, to me, the best argument was when they were prohibiting Spotify from just advertising in the App Store. Like, obviously, other app devs can advertise, but when Spotify wanted to run a promo for Spotify Premium, Apple just straight up said, no, you can't advertise that. Basically, because it competes with Apple Music. And I was like, okay, that's kind of selective. I was like, that seems a little bit over the line. So there's an argument to be made that they make some unfair practices, but none of what the Department of Justice is really pushing has been logical to me. Like, the Apple Watch should be compatible with Android, which is funny because that would probably weaken Android Watch sales if it was. Or that because it's hard, the bill was ridiculous. They were bringing up that, well, the Fire Phone tried to come out, but it couldn't compete with the iPhone. So all the competition died because no one wanted to buy the Fire Phone. So it's like, now you're mad at Apple because the Fire Phone failed, or you're mad because there's a different, people said, if I stop using an iPhone and switch to something else, the user has to learn a different user interface. It's like, oh no, it's Apple's fault that the iPhone user interface is so good. Now if I try to learn Android, I'll be confused. Darn you, Apple. And yeah, Google does the exact same thing. I would say leave the government out of tech. Yeah, Phil Collins is saying leave government out of tech unless there's a real monopoly. I would argue that there's a lot of monopolies. It's just not so much in the big tech space. Depends on the field, but there's a lot of internet service providers and utility companies that I would argue is much, much closer. I know a lot of people that like the Windows Phone, but I guess not enough did because they killed it off. It's just funny that Apple gets blamed for killing off something that Microsoft failed at. Now, Microsoft and Amazon's failure is being pushed on Apple. Yeah, surprisingly, the Department of Justice was not going too much over the App Store. They were mainly just talking about ecosystem compatibility. And they were complaining that when you text someone that doesn't have an iPhone, it's all pixelated. And it's like, yeah, well, again, you can... Most people, the most common messaging app in the US is not iMessage, by the way. It's Facebook Messenger. And that hosts all the pictures and videos you send for free. So most people are using other messaging services anyway. But that problem has already been alleviated with Apple announcing RCS support, which is coming later this year. So you will be able to send high quality pictures and videos and still have all the reactions. So iMessage for Android users should be improved. Or the texting, I should say, between Android and iOS should be a lot better. Some have argued it's because the ecosystem locks you in, but I don't even think that was a good argument. I mean, you can use a ton of Google services on Apple hardware, to be honest. I mean, there's things that lock you in, I guess, but it's not so much of a lock as it's just so convenient, and the alternative is just to not have those kinds of features. Like if I bought a Chromebook and a Pixel phone, I wouldn't have this continuity camera feature. So is Apple wrong for locking me into the ecosystem with that cool feature? I don't think it's Apple's fault. And yeah, most of the world uses WhatsApp, which is not owned by Apple. The Fire Phone is part of their claim. They used the Fire Phone as an example of like, see, they stifled the competitors. Fire Phone failed because the iPhone was better. Drew has become way less partisan about Android versus iOS. He's been fair and open-minded when testing the Pixel. Thank you, Michael. I appreciate you saying that. I noticed Amazon, Google, and Meta all spend significant amounts more for lobbying than Apple. Could this be the result? Well, there's some antitrust cases against them too, but yeah, Apple's been cutting back on all their employees and all their spending. Choosing convenience is Apple's fault. Yeah. Apple made a better platform. How dare they? You can use a Pixel as a USB webcam on pretty much everything, including a MacBook. Yay. Good. That's great. That's wonderful. But I like to do it wirelessly. So that's Apple's fault for letting me have that option be wireless. I think it's more the physical products they're saying lock you in. They're saying it's not as easy to switch platforms because it's expensive, but that goes both ways. Yeah, I don't know why that falls on Apple. If I buy a Pixel and a Pixel Watch and I want to switch to an iPhone, now I have to buy an Apple Watch because the Pixel Watch won't work on iOS. So is that Google's fault? Should the government get involved? No. There's so many things the government could be doing better, like public transportation or health. This is the last thing I think they should be wasting their time on. Healthcare, especially in the U.S., is a giant train wreck. Public transportation also doesn't get enough priority. There's so many other things I feel like, or the military spends way too much money in general. Will they blame Kindle tablets failure because of the iPad? Yeah, that's kind of the argument they're making. Thank you, Chris Norton, by the way, for the super chat. That was totally unnecessary. Very kind of you. Yes, Drew, Apple is wrong for trying to make their features easy to use no matter what hardware you get from them. I guess they're mad that Apple doesn't put, like the W1 AirPods chip where, you open the lid and it pops up and you hit connect. They should supply the silicon to their competitors. I mean, they let the Find My network be open. I think there's been some proof of Apple being more open-minded on their standards and stuff. They let Apple Music work on cars that don't have CarPlay now. They made it kind of easier to access for the masses. Same thing with the Find My network. Like I said, you can integrate devices and chips into things that Apple doesn't make. I agree. Those two things are more important. Far more important than these big tech companies, which are just focused on trying to make the better, more easier to use product. Yeah, let's say healthcare, public transportation, and lowering military spending. That's if I was president, that would be my focus. Those three things are probably far more crucial and far more important than, hey, I have to use a different interface if I stop using an iPhone. If you really care about sideloading, don't buy an iPhone. That's how I feel. But some people want a more closed, locked in, well optimized operating system. Some people want those safety parameters. Are we supposed to eliminate the option for the general public? Are we supposed to eliminate the option to have a first party controlled experience if we want to have a more closed off ecosystem? If someone wants that, which a lot of people do, a lot of people don't want to have to download the Meta App Store and the Epic Game Store, and people don't want to have 16 different launchers. That's what happened on Windows, to be honest. That's one of the reasons. I've never said I hate Android. I have said I hate Windows on the record. Part of the reason is because there'd be like 15 different games and they would all want you to download their own launcher, and that weakens the experience. It makes it more clunky. It doesn't make it as simple or intuitive, even though each developer is going, well, if we put our game on Steam, we have to pay 30% to Steam. Or if we put our game on Epic, we have to pay 12% to Epic. So instead, you add all these different game libraries. So you got 15 different, and then every time you turn on the computer, it has to load every single one of them. We got more updates for you to install. So rather than that, Apple said, let's keep it simple. Let's make just one app store that controls the whole platform. And then that platform ended up becoming the best one. So it seems like maybe people want it. Richard, thank you for the super chat. Didn't Nokia have 50% market share when Apple released the iPhone? Apple created a better product and consumers responded by buying it. Nokia, stupid monopoly at 50%. Well, let's look up definition of monopoly just so we're clear on that. What will come first, another lawsuit for Apple or the new iPads? Probably another lawsuit at this point. Apple selling the M chips to others like nothing. Google, Microsoft would be interesting. If they want to, I've got no problem with that. It's the company's choice, in my opinion. But if they would like to keep their silicon in-house and have only them access it, I think that's also their choice. But then you can get different deals on games. Again, it's your choice. If you want to do that, you can. But if another company decides, no, we just want to have one app store so you don't have to have 15 different launchers, okay, you buy the product that fits you best. If we reached a point where all the companies were doing the exact same thing, I guess maybe get a regulator involved. But now we have very different companies doing very different approaches to software. I only have Minecraft launcher. Didn't think that was a thing on other games. I got my girlfriend a Windows laptop so she can play The Sims. Turns out the launcher isn't supported with that laptop. Oh, fun. So now it's just, it works on Windows? Oh, no, it's not that simple. Which Windows are we talking about here? Thank you for the super chat, by the way, Richard. That was very kind of you. Yeah, I, for the most part, am in favor of the free market. I mean, there's certain times where the government should get involved. I don't personally believe this is one of them. For Apple Watch compatibility and If you're worried about texting being inferior on non-Apple devices, RCS is going to solve 80% of those problems. Hey, if the government getting involved results in the wallet app coming to Android, is that how this is going to end? It's like companies have to have advantages over each other. That's the point of competition, right? The whole point of having companies compete against each other is one company has advantages and they try to enhance those advantages. So Apple's advantage was designing their own silicon, designing their own software, trying to make it more efficient, more powerful. So they leaned into the more creative outworks of like audio engineering and video editing and software engineering. And Windows leaned more into the let's have open platform. Game devs will feel more comfortable bringing their games over here. So now Windows advantages is more in the game access, all of the different libraries you can access, and way more game support, way more customization. You can put it on any hardware you want. So they both lean into the different demands of the market. Apple leaned into one demand. Windows and Microsoft lead into another. Same thing, Google found a different demand for the market of having more control over your home screen or the apps on your phone. And so Android leaned into that. Apple leaned into the simplicity of just making sure everything worked and trying to keep things consistent. So, yeah, no competition means no growth. I agree. I think it's important that all these companies actually have very different approaches. I don't think we should have Google try to be more like Apple. And I don't think we should have Apple try to be more like Google. They should just try to figure out what their audiences care more about and lean into those advantages. And then you can buy the one that fits your advantages best. And if a product doesn't sell all that well, it's probably because it's not leaning too much into other it's not leaning into a demand. There's not a lot of people asking for whatever that product or service is. Unreal Cousin says, what do you mean about Apple Music without CarPlay? Do you mean without your phone? Because I play Apple Music on my 2013 car. Yeah. Well, I mean, in the old days, it was hard to get like native Apple Music support in the infotainment without Bluetooth or without CarPlay. But now, like Teslas, for example, have Apple Music support. Porsche's got Apple Music support. Streaming straight to the car. You don't have to have your phone. You don't have to have CarPlay. It just, you log in on there and it works. Samsung Notes now won't sync to any Windows device that isn't a Galaxy Book. Really frustrating. You can own a $1,500 Samsung phone and they want to upsell a Galaxy Book. Get the government involved. This sounds wrong. No, Apple users want all the Apple features. No, Mac OS is infinitely superior to Windows as an OS. I feel like most people I know I've said this a million times, but I'm going to say it a million more. Most people I know that like Windows, they like it because it has some third-party software that they need, whether it be a video game or a work application that's not available on Mac. Whereas I know a lot of people that like Mac OS just as an OS. It's not about, well, I like Mac OS because it has Final Cut. It's like, no, I like Mac OS because of how they designed this or how it integrates with my phone or how it supports this or how they designed this. I see more appreciation for the actual design with Mac OS, and with Windows, it's usually, well, I like Windows because it runs blah, blah, blah. Google probably does have a monopoly on browsers. Chromium browsers make up a huge majority. Basically, Firefox is the only non-Chromium alternative, along with some forks. But yeah, I mean, it works, which is probably why it's so popular. So that's where I take issue, is like when people have no other options and are getting price gouged. I refuse to believe that. I have a hard time believing that there's a lot of people out there just living in the I have to buy an iPhone, I have to use an iPhone. There's no alternative. It's like, there's probably a cheaper alternative. As someone who's reviewed Android phones, you can get way better hardware for way less money. And then people, well, I'm bullied into buying it. It's like, okay, I don't think the government should get involved because of, someone trying to peer pressure you. All right, get the nukes. Sigmund Jones super chatted, is there benefits to the U.S. economy if Apple loses to the Department of Justice? Surely a weakened Apple isn't beneficial at a time the economy is already in a state of decline. Yeah, I don't honestly know what the Department of Justice's end result is. Probably just to slap Apple with a bunch of fines so they can collect a few $billions. They probably know that if they go after Apple, they'll get a lot of money out of it. So yeah, I don't think there's much. Let's see. Windows had its glory. It's over now. Pixels just are now getting video out. You can sync messages between all devices if they're all Pixels with a Google account, but have to use messages for web otherwise. A feature that only works with other Pixels? How dare they? They should be forced to add that compatibility with iOS. Microsoft Bing is viable if you like reward programs, but that's it. Rewards program. Yeah, I agree. I think if we broke up Apple into separate companies, it would probably just make the hardware more distorted and more confusing. Is Google funding the Department of Justice with this? Ooh, I hope not. OnePlus does that a little bit as well, or did. It seems to be the obvious direction everyone is going. Well, yeah, it's not evil or something. It just makes sense that if you're in control of hardware and software, or if you have control of both ends of the user experience, you can probably come up with some advantages that no one else could. You know, makes sense to me. A lot of people like Mac OS because the terminal app gives you access to the Unix commands line and all that Unix terminals tool. Yeah, it's again they have their advantages. You buy the one that fits your advantages, the one that matters to you. Wenhen says, I thought the whole thing was restrictive access to APIs. I love my Garmin smartwatch because it's better for outdoors, but without notification management, it's more annoying than the Apple Watch. I could see them cracking down on that, I suppose. A restrictive access to APIs. I guess the debate is like, well, if Apple wants to give certain advantages to their Apple Watch, is that inherently wrong? Like, are they wrong to want their product to have advantages over the competition? Or should they make sure that anytime they come up with a new feature for their AirPods or for their Apple Watch, they have to also make sure that all of those same features are available on all of the competitors' hardware, which is going to take more time, more software development, an already understaffed software team. Are they trying to make iOS like Android? That's what's going to be the difference between them. I guess. I mean, they're not mad at Android, it seems. I bought all Google Nest stuff and ended up returning it after I realized it was limited. Yeah. It would be real funny if Apple's lawyers are watching the stream and taking notes. I'll do it, Apple. You can pay me. I'll be your lawyer. A little bit off topic, but do you think that there will be an iPhone 16 Plus, or is the Mini will come back? There's no current evidence that the Minis are coming back, so yeah, there will be a 16 Plus most likely. Honestly, Google would have conflicted feelings about this lawsuit. In some ways, it could help them, but in other ways, they could be next. Yeah, I was gonna say that's a good point. There's a lot of things that they're mad at Apple for doing that lots of other companies are also doing. It's just Apple's the most successful company doing it, so that's probably why the DOJ is going after them first. And then if they knock down Apple a few pegs, then everybody else probably falls in line. It's just I don't think providing API access to just the Apple Watch or something, but you can offload text messaging stuff. I remember using a Fitbit with my iPhone, and I could get notifications on that. There were certain notification features that I don't think the Fitbit had next to the Apple Watch, but still, should Apple be forced to make sure every feature is available? Do they have to bring the activity rings to the third-party competitors now? Um, you could just take a note on Keep and it would sync with an iPhone and an Android on Windows or Mac. I don't really even like it that much, but it's convenient enough if you have a lot of devices. Someone should sue Apple for killing the mini iPhone. Please! That I would get behind that lawsuit. Bring back the mini phone. Michael Peppertech says, seems like the irony in this all is that they don't want each company to have specific features limited to each company. Isn't competition existing only when there are differences? Right. It's like, okay, where are the differences supposed to be? Just in the logos or the hardware? It's like we want all software to be compatible with all hardware and all of the features are the same. So you buy the Pixel Watch because it's round or you buy the Apple Watch because it's square. That's the only you're not allowed to give yourself too much of an advantage. Yeah, I don't think anyone actually believes that. I think they're just going after Apple because they know they're big and successful at this. They know they can slap a big fine on them. I don't think anyone actually believes we need to get to a point where like every phone has the exact same APIs and has the exact same app stores, and it doesn't matter which one you use. They all work the same, and every watch and every headphone works with every. I think that makes it a little too. There's only hardware advantages, but I don't know. I think that makes it a bit boring. Kevin says, "Thank you for the stream. I'm stuck in a boring meeting. I'm sorry. I might have to end it a little early, though. In fairness, Google and Microsoft have both been heavily scrutinized by regulators across the world, especially Windows in Europe. I guess anybody that's too successful is just going to get penalized for it, I suppose. Um, the popularity of Apple devices among members of Congress far outstrips that of any other brand. A survey by The Hill has found of the 102 lawmakers whose offices responded to The Hill's questions. That makes sense. I like my iPhone, but they're just mad that their iPhone isn't doing some other Android feature because they don't want to switch to Android. It's easier for me to sue Apple and turn them into Android than it is for me to get a different phone. Yeah, I agree. I mean, you could argue a lot of utilities and a lot of QR code scanning and boarding passes and digital payment systems, and now I guess you could argue that smartphones are slowly becoming more of a right than a privilege. Like, it's honestly probably going to be easier in a few years to take away someone's driver's license than it is their phone. If it's not an iPhone, it's not an iPhone. That's right. Random Channel says, if I'm quite honest, with Apple being repair guy unfriendly and $1,000 computers with 8 gigs of RAM, I find it hard to recommend Macs compared to your average Windows PC, especially for talking gaming. Sure. Don't recommend them if you don't want them. I've never tried to convince someone who's used a PC that they should switch to Mac, just to be clear, because I understand how many differences there are between the platform. I have, however, had lots of people with Macs ask me which Mac they think they should get. I've also never told people on this channel that they should switch to iOS from Android. I've always said if you have an Android phone, it's not worth switching ecosystems because it's a pain in the butt. But I don't think that means the government should make it easy to switch ecosystems. I don't. Just a bunch of forceful work that's probably going to complicate the systems further. There's other phones out there. Government is wasting their time on the dumb lawsuit. The U.S. government utter joke at the they've not just at this point. The U.S. government was designed from day one to be slow and unsuccessful. The founding fathers were annoyed with the tyrannical government they were working with, so they were all about how do we make sure that a government can't have too much power and can't come up with laws too quickly. So the whole U.S. federal government, basically from the ground up, was designed to be very inefficient and slow. No, you don't have to apologize. I agree with you. I think most governments in general suck. They all have problems. Most large entities that are run by humans suck. I think we need to give users choice. If a user wants to get their app somewhere else than the App Store, to be fair, Apple has lost control of the App Store. You can get scammed in the App Store. Yeah, I think you have a choice to not use an iPhone. Do you think that's not an option? But if Apple wants to keep it to just the iOS App Store, I think that's their choice. And if you don't like it, don't agree to the terms. I don't think we should get rid of the option to have a closed off first party controlled ecosystem if someone wants it, which a lot of people clearly do. It's 60% market share. The government watched one too many videos of I switched to. They need to look at internet service provider monopolies and the lack of real competition between carriers. I agree. I think those are much, much closer to being monopolies because they just jack up the prices for no reason. But anyway, I'm going to have to sign off about here, guys, but I appreciate the conversations. I know a lot of you are probably just never going to agree with me, but yeah, most of the government uses iPhone. That's why they're suing Apple. They probably don't know who to sue if they used an Android. It's not like people don't know that when they buy an iPhone. They are limited to what's in the App Store. Yeah, exactly. And if they're annoyed by that, then okay, aren't you taking away an advantage of Android by making alt stores and sideloading available on iOS? Wouldn't Android now lose a lot of their advantages? Maybe their market share would decrease further. I don't know. It's just kind of a endless loop conversation, but appreciate your guys' support, and I hope you have an excellent rest of your day. Take care, all. Bye-bye.